Announcing the 1916 Company app, fully redesigned, available on the Apple App Store and Google Play, combining new watches from many brands with more being added all the time, and our traditionally vast collection of pre-owned luxury timepieces. A redesigned homepage, a natural departure point for trading, browsing our inventory, and checking out our studio originals. Build your online wish list, a virtual collection that allows you to leverage all of the makes, models, and reference numbers in our databases. And seamless trading. Contact your advisor, forward pictures, get an estimate, and choose your next match from our vast online inventory. All of this on the 1916 Company app, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store.
So hello everybody, Mike Mangios here with Armand, and we're here today to talk about one of my favorite brands, a Lange Söhne. And it's always been one of my favorite brands. We have a great selection of pieces to talk about. We're gonna talk a little bit about the history and really go through and kind of share our passion for the brand. Armand, where are we gonna start?
We are gonna start, not quite from the beginning, but with the 1815 chronograph.
I would love to start with 1815, because again, to me, one of the most iconic things always about Lange was chronographs. And it goes back to 1999, the Datograph. So basically, back in the day, everybody used kind of outsourced movements for chronograph because they were small production numbers. They weren't the most popular watches in the world. So nobody really wanted to invest the time. And then suddenly you walk into Basel, 1999, and there's this giant blow up of this amazing looking chronograph from a brand that all of us are like, Germany? Lange? Making an in-house chronograph, and everybody just took notice.
I think the difference in design language on the Datograph is interesting with the subdials below the 9 and 3. So right off the bat, it is a different type of chronograph design than what we're used to.
Correct. And one of the things that Lange was famous for, starting with the Lange 1, was kind of these unusual designs. They really went in their own direction. It was very Germanic. It was a little heavy for the time. And even the Datograph in 39 millimeters at the time was a big watch and heavy in platinum. So then fast forward 5 years, and in 2004, we got this beauty, the 1815 chrono. Now, a little slimmed down, which a lot of people were asking for because the Datograph was very thick.
Saving a date complication.
Saving the date complication, but still gorgeous attention to detail. So the intent of this was to try to be a real straightforward chronograph. Now, but if you notice, there's a lot of design details on this. You've got the pulsometer scale. You've got a stepped dial. It's really a relatively busy, kind of funky chronograph, and wasn't the most successful piece they had done in a long time.
It's interesting. It's it is relatively slim for a manual wind chronograph with the degree of finishing, with the depth of movement that it does have. When we talk about Lange movements, especially Dato and any chrono really, the depth of movement is something that we discuss a lot. And it's a little city on your wrist. And that's a phrase that I've used a lot.
I love that phrase because honestly, when it was designed, and again, think traditional Swiss design, it was all about function. And it was all about making things that were durable and would last and, precision. The Germans came in and said, we also want it to be beautiful. And with the different finishes, you get that depth that no one had really ever done before.
And German silver takes such a finish. It's gorgeous. Paired with the flame blued screws, the gold chantan, the whole nine on this piece and everything that we're going to talk about is really outrageous. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of Lange. You get bottom-up finishing. The finishing that you get at the very top is the same as you get at the entry level.
It's a great point, and it's one of the things that I loved about Lange. I've been lucky enough to go there 4 times in my life and spend some excessive amount of time annoying people there. But you go, and they're just lined up with finishers, mostly women, who are just sitting there on the bench, filing parts, both sides, the side you don't see, the side you see. And the detail on that, what back then was a $15,000 watch, was the same finishing that was on these $100,000 watches, which was amazing. And I never understood how they could make money doing it. Now you fast forward to today, there's very few Langes nowadays that are really kind of sub 30,000, which I think is why there's been a big demand in the secondary market, because you can get a watch that has amazing finishing without really getting into that $40, $50, $100,000 price range.
Well, even your entry-level 1815s, an 1815 up-down, for example, or a standard Saxonia time only, the finishing is gorgeous. It is outrageous, and Lange is one of the few brands that works that way.
Correct. And the thing I love about this was it is a little bit of a funky look. It was out for 4 years. They didn't produce a lot of them, so there's not many in the market. And then they did the second generation, which went to the much more traditional silver dial, no scale, no pulsometer, and really, to me, lost a little bit of the style and funkiness of this one. And the collectors have recently agreed. Everybody wants that first gen piece.
You know, the busyness of this adds to the kind of funky nature of it. It's not the most difficult watch to read, but it's more of you have to have a purposeful look at it to read it.
Yes, yes.
And I think the numbers of the 1815 line, the markers paired with the tachometer scale are kind of cool. It's definitely different. The font is different, but I like that. It shares an air of romance along with, I guess, tool watch aspect, if you could even call it that.
Yeah, and it wears a little smaller because of that pulsometer. The second generation wears bigger, and I kind of like that kind of old vintagey. You know, it looks like a 2004.
It absolutely does. You're so right. And you know, to that point, the movement still fits the case.
Yes.
Which is really nice, and which other brands can't necessarily say for a similar time period.
Well, it's funny because one of the only complaints people have made over time was Lange always makes a movement to fit the case. And in this one, they used the same base movement. They just kind of scaled it down. So you had some people complain about it. I think it's amazing. I love everything about that watch. And I think long-term, it's going to be even more and more collectible.
So the predecessor to the 1815 chrono was the original 39mm Datograph,
Correct.
non-up-down. Now, we do have the up-down.
It's, again, more balanced, believe it or not, than the original. Because the
agree.
original at 39 was really thick.
Yeah.
And if you ever wore one, they tend to go a little wonky on you. I mean, it was a little bulky for sure. So the balance on this one, I think, is better. And I do love the up-down indicator. It's very Germanic. It's very Lange if you go back to their early pocket watches. And it still has that spectacular movement.
This is kind of one of the classic configurations to your platinum black dial. Now, seeing the Rose 1815 next to the Dato is interesting because I really like the warmth of the subdials with the Rose and the I guess, chilliness of the subdials with the platinum. It matches so well.
Yeah, the Lange has often done those platinum blacks, really starting with the Darth, going into the Datos. You know, we'll get to the Zeitwerk, but I mean, that look is very Lange. And the early Langes really were that funky, you know, you had some of the Lange ones with cool colored dials, you had, and then for a number of years, they really went plain. They tried to go more mainstream, they had a change in upper management, and they got away from kind of being quirky, which, you know, there's nothing better to me than quirky. And I love quirky.
Lange 1 got a little stale in the sense of, you know, a standard silver dial, it appeals to most people. And I think you and I being in the industry, we see a lot of silver dials.
Yes.
So
yes.
your standard silver dial Lange 1 is not my personal favorite, as classic as it may be.
No,
but
there's a million of better choices.
Give me a yellow gold dial or something like that. Outrageous.
Oh, I love the yellow grays. I mean, there's so many combinations that they did, and again, in short runs, that you won't see everywhere. And I think that's the thing with Lange that I also love is, you know, typically Lange is not your first high-end watch.
Not your first stop.
You know, maybe down the road, Lange comes up because you appreciate more of the horology, you appreciate the quality of it, and you start looking at the little quirkiness of it. And it really does tend to appeal to that guy who's got 3 or 4 other watches or been there, done that, and wants something a little more different.
There's an air of German efficiency to design and everything having to do with the front of every Lange, I find. And then when you turn it over, that's where all of the romance is.
Yes, yes, which is kind of funny because it really is under the hood. I mean, there's not a better brand, in my opinion, on the backside.
I couldn't agree more.
Without a doubt, for the fit, the finish, and again, the different finishes with the different watches. You know, the finish they're doing on Datos is very different than we're going to see the finish on the Zeitwerk or the 31 or even the Split. I mean, it's everything is to the watch, which I love.
Moving to the Zeitwerk, it's interesting seeing a design like this. This is it's a digital watch. This is effectively a mechanical digital watch, with, of course, jump minute, jump hour. And what you don't necessarily understand at first glance, it has a constant force mechanism, the escapement, which is part of the reason that the minute disc rather can jump reliably
and right
in line. And looking at the front of the watch, again, you have a staunch, I wouldn't call it stale, but very purposeful design. And then turning it over, you have shapes, you have circles, you have organic shapes, you have square shapes, you have an anchor shape, you have a hand engraved balance cock. There's just so much going on the underside of the watch that the wearer and the owner understands and doesn't need to see all the time.
No, you're absolutely right. And the engraving is something we'll talk about, because that was the other thing that I loved at the place was when you went there, Helmut was the head of their engraving department, I believe still is. Great German name. And he would introduce himself as number 6, because he was the 6th employee ever to start at Lange. And if you look at the company and if you look at the work, his influence is everywhere, because he was such an early pioneer there. And he made it so each watch had a signature. So with 6 engravers they had at the time, you could flip over any watch and bring the watch you were wearing, and they would tell you which one of them did it. And I love the fact that you have the hand of the man or woman in a lot of cases of the person who made it.
The signature, the engraving signature, so to speak.
Exactly. Now this watch has always been one of my favorites for a couple of reasons, mainly because of the way it was introduced. So flashback to 2009, and you got to have perspective of the time. We went from 06 and 07 when you could do no wrong in the watch business. Everything you could buy would be sold immediately. It was, the glory days. And then all of a sudden the financial crisis hits. And really selling anything outside of Rolex and Patek was almost impossible. And suddenly like, I don't know if I really want to go off on my own. I might need to sell it someday, and who knows where the market's going to be. So in 2009, we get a call from Lange. You need to come to Germany. Okay, we're going to Berlin. Okay, they take us to Berlin. They fly in basically all their dealers from across the world, and we're going to have dinner in the dark. Like, okay, dinner in the dark. What is dinner in the dark? So literally they take us into a theater, and it is completely black. And they walk you in by your elbow, and the waitstaff is blind. And they walk you to your table and sit you down, and you cannot see anything. And I mean, nothing. And a couple people freaked out and had to get out because it was a little weird at first, disorienting. And, I did the smart thing. I grabbed the wine bottle I could find and said, I'll be okay. I got myself
Emergency
handle, we're ready to go. And what they did was they started passing out pieces of the watch. And they said, when one sense is diminished, your other senses get better. And you had to try to figure out exactly what you were feeling, how they made it. It was just the craziest night I'd ever spent. It was amazing. And then at the end of the evening, they flipped on the lights, and you got to see the watch and meet the guys who made it. And a lot of the details that were done, like part of the face of it, that dial is actually part of a bridge, because they were very conscious of the thickness. I think from the Datograph experience, where people complained about the thickness. So this was a way to make it thinner. It was like nothing anybody had ever seen in the market. The old digital watches that were made, Vacheron did one that was cool, Saltarellos, all those things that were cool. They never really hit precise. But the precision, you could go backwards and forwards. It was just an amazing piece, and has really become an icon of Lange.
I love that the fact that this plate is a bridge is showcased not only by a screw, but by a diamond end cap on the balance here. So cool. And I think upon first glance, a lot of people would think it was design versus function, which it's both. And that is the German way.
That is the German way, without a question.
Now, when this came out, how was it received? Because I would argue that this is a dressy watch, albeit large and thick.
Yes, it was large and thick. But at that time, we were starting to get into bigger watches had really taken over.
Super Avengers.
Panerai had been out for 7 or 8 years now, and kept getting bigger and bigger, and we went from 44s to 47s. So at this point, the size wasn't a problem, and people kind of liked that chunkiness. You sometimes got the complaints back then that the 3940s were a little small, and the 3970s were even a little delicate for guys who wanted something bigger and beefier. So the size was great, and we got a great response to it because it was so different.
Yeah.
And it was perfect for what the market needed, and nobody thought we needed it.
I think it helps that the case, and this case, and almost every Lange case for that matter, is remarkably round, and you get welded and soldered lugs. So it's very true to size, to the point where almost it wears a touch smaller than the size suggests, which...
Yeah, it does. I mean, they're very wearable. That's the funny thing. Even the big ones, because of the lugs, the way they drop down, because of the design to it, you're right.
Your striking times, your repeaters.
Yes.
Yep.
They're very wearable sizes.
Which brings us to our next piece, an extremely wearable Lange, the Lange 31. This is a 31-day power reserve. Now, I would call this manual wind, with the exception that it's key wind.
It is key wind, and that was the funny thing, is like the crown does nothing except set the time. It is an amazing engineering feat because, again, at the time, it was the longest power reserve watch that was made. Again, I remember going, at the time, it was to Geneva, and we would go meet with them, and they brought it out, and I've never seen two guys who looked more exhausted because they were literally like finishing it the day before. It hadn't slept in a month. But some of the stories they shared with it was when they first did the design of the mainspring, because predominantly the movement is mainspring.
Huge mainspring. The barrel is about the size of a quarter, I would say.
Right, and when they sent this technical specifications to their manufacturer for the mainspring, the guy was like, "Oh, cool, Lange's making a clock." No. Because that is a really big wristwatch.
That is a traditional clock power reserve a month.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what it is. So, I mean, an incredible piece, not the most practical piece in the world. It is still big, and I like big. It is big. And the first version was platinum. So, I would refer to it as the hockey puck of Lange. It was just big and heavy and huge. But over the years, we've sold a number of them, and it's still an impressive piece.
You still have the very, I would call it Lange 1 aesthetic. Now, despite the non-off-center timekeeping, you have centralized timekeeping, but you have one semicircle and one circle in the subseconds that really pulls the Lange design language, the grid of the complications that Lange uses, right into the forefront of this watch, which I think is awesome because otherwise it's relatively simple. You do have a grand date, which is nice, right. Another staple of Lange, quick adjust grand date. And beyond that, the deployant. The deployant is only for this watch.
It is only for this watch, and that's one of the things I loved. I didn't know if you were going to point that out, but it's great because it's such a Lange thing to do that they realized because of the size and shape, the regular deployant wasn't pulling the weight. So they really engineered a specific buckle that will hopefully keep it balanced properly on you and really only goes on that watch.
And it is significantly different. One thing, I'm not the biggest deployant guy. In fairness, I'd like a tang buckle or a bracelet. Now, when I have worn precious metal watches with a deployant, the balance of the deployant is critical, honestly, especially on something like this. This is a full, this is a significant amount heavier than the standard Lange deployant.
It is, and honestly, I will argue it was the first Lange deployant that they actually designed.
Oh, fair.
Because if you look closely at the original Lange, and you have to realize that a lot of the original guys, including Kurt Klaus, who was helping Walter Lange in the development of the early production, came from IWC. And the management came from IWC. They kind of all shifted over. And, they were kind of scrambling in the early days to produce things. And they're like, we need a deployant buckle. We don't have the time or the money to design one. So if you look at an IWC Perpetual with a deployant buckle, it looks exactly the same because it is, which I think is a great tribute to a startup. We think of it as such a developed brand and now part of a big group, but it was really a startup when it started.
Which is amazing, right down to the early solid casebacks and everything, which is a little quirk that I absolutely love. But I do like that they maintain the design in the
they own it now. Still, it looks more like a Lange buckle today than an IWC.
I couldn't agree more.
So, they made it their own, so I love that.
Going ultra complicated.
Yes.
The 1815 Perpetual Chrono.
I love this thing. It is just, to have a split chrono is a big thing. Again, get that same design language on the back. It is just incredible. And there's so much packed into what is a relatively compact size.
For
but
a
solid.
chrono, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was funny. I was comparing the movements between the 1815 chrono, the Datograph, and the 1815 Perpetual, and these two very fundamentally similar, completely different.
Completely different. And the thing I love is Lange has done a lot of high complications and continues to do them today. They are, like most brands, extremely expensive.
Yes.
And, let's just call a spade a spade. I mean, this is an expensive piece. But in the secondary market, I mean, this watch can be bought for basically less than the Dato Perpetual was retail.
Yeah.
Which is an amazing thing. So you really get an advantage in the secondary market with Lange. And I think that's part of the reason why we've seen, such a big uptick over the last few months is the value really is there for what you're getting and the quality. We all know what happened to the market. Things went nuts. There are still some pieces that are crazy. We'll get to the Steel Odysseus, which I still think is crazy. But the pricing on these kind of classic, dressier, high complications is to a point today where I think the value is incredible. You'll see the same thing on Zeitwerk. You'll see the same thing on Dato up-downs. I mean, that to me is just an iconic Lange. And you don't see a lot of them because, again, the same reason. It's a small brand. They still today are doing probably 5,000 watches a year. So in that kind of quality and the detail you're getting in a small, rare production, I think it's awesome piece.
Putting those numbers kind of in the forefront is interesting because you at that level of production, you do have to cut out a little space for things like this, And, you have your kind of more core collection, I would call it. And they still produce special pieces. They still produce...
Oh, amazing amount of special pieces. For 5,000 units, if you think about it, all the models, from Lange 1 to just the regular chronographs, if you start dividing it out, is very few of any particular model in a given year. With the volume of pieces they have and the breadth of the line. And so I think there is rarity inherently in the brand.
The depth of production of high complication pieces as well for such a small brand, for so few, it's remarkable that they take the time to do it.
Yes. I mean, one of my favorite things, again, on one of my visits, we got to meet there was two guys who make the turbographs, and they made 51 pieces because in their limited editions, they used to always make 50 and one for Walter Lange. So all the productions were 51 That's or 101. It was amazing. And they still have them all in the museum, his pieces. But the guys who were making them were literally, one was 26, one was 28. And these kids are like all tatted up and have hair like you and, look way too cool to be doing grand complications. But those were the guys because they recruit them. And when I say that, they have to actually have their own school and they start kids at 17 years old. Man. And it is the culture in Germany to be an apprentice. And, they take them and they give them a stipend and they give them room and board. And they're basically born into this. And then by the time they're 20 or 21, they're ready to go to work. And they have the option of coming to Lange or they can go out in the world.
Watchmaking vocation into college style.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
amazing.
And it's just, it's such a cool place. It's such a small little, one light town. I just love everything they do and the passion you feel when you go there. And anybody who has the opportunity, and they will welcome you, get to Glashütte, get to Lange, take the tour. If you show any interest and you show any, knowledge or passion, you will be there all day and half the night and drinking beer with them.
Oh, man.
Because they just love this. They have left Lange to be kind of its own Rupert's jewel. And it is very independent, and they really do their own thing, as you can see from the production.
With the push towards indies, whenever I discuss Lange, there is always a footnote in the fact that they're Richemont owned, and they operate very independently.
Yes.
They operate very similar to that of our favorite independents.
Correct.
In the sense of, you don't feel like they're answering the shareholders.
Correct. And I don't think they ever have, because when you go there and you see the handwork that goes into that, bottom of the line watch, as we'll call it, there's no way you're making money on that watch. I can guarantee you this. I don't care where we are and how low wages might be in East Germany, but they've really come a long way and definitely was not done. It was done out of pride and joy. And it reminds me, if you go back a long time, when Hayek owned Breguet. And when the old man was still with us, every year you would go to see him and he would show you his production. And you could tell from the Marie Antoinette watch to it was his baby.
Yep.
And he could care less if he was making money doing this. This was what he loved.
He cared about brand preservation.
Correct. It was more about the brand. It was about the product, and the pride that you feel over there is an incredible thing.
So something that's one of these things are not like the others. And this is something that I don't think Lange does very often. And that's, I would call this trend following.
Yeah, I would definitely call it trend following. And again, I'm a purist for sure. And I didn't think they needed to do it. And for years, I would go and have dinner. And when we would go over there, and I'd have dinner with Mr. Schmidt, and we'd sit together the first night and have a lot of wine and talk about, what they should be doing and shouldn't be doing. And I was surprised they did this. And it took them a lot of years. And they did make it Lange. But to me, a steel bracelet sports watch with a blue dial was not their thing. I mean, it is crazy over retail, and it's a cool piece.
It's something that's grown on me so significantly, I can't even begin to tell you. I had qualms with the watch when it came out, and now I kind of have none. The one thing I will say is that the bracelet could be a little easier to size.
Yes.
And a good friend and client of mine will reflect that. But other than that, you have micro adjustments in the clasp, which is great.
No, you can't complain about the design. I mean, it's just the quality is amazing. The design is excellent. The details are spectacular. It's just felt like I'm coming to the party late and I need to have this exact configuration. Now, I like the titanium version they did better. Yep. I like the complications they did with it.
I like the white gold.
The white gold is good with the rubber strap because it's very different. But this was, again, felt like they had to check a box, and I don't necessarily feel like they needed to.
In principle, fit and finish, though, it is gorgeous.
Absolutely.
It wears remarkably well. It's comfortable. It's legible. I think the function of the buttons, one of the qualms I had at first, has really grown on me because, again, to your point, it's very Lange.
Yes, it's very Lange. It's very engineered, and it's amazing. But, my heart is here.
I could not agree more. I absolutely could not agree more. But great collection, great selection of the brand in general. And kind of almost from the beginning type of discussion.
Yeah, no, I love that part of it. And I love the fact that, we have a breadth of inventory that I know nobody else has. And I love that part of it. That's the thing I love about the 1916 company is we can take you from one end to the other end. And we love the stuff and we're always sourcing it. So there's always, I get a lot of calls every day because I'm kind of the Lange guy. Yep. So from all over the world, I'll have people reach out with questions on Langes or really oddball pieces that you haven't seen. And there always seems to be another one. But it's still my favorite brand to work with every day.
I think Lange is the brand that I learned the most about unexpectedly. Today, I learned that this came out in 2004.
There you go. There's a lot to learn every day, and we get to do it every day. So this is more fun than I can imagine.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mike.
No, thanks for joining me with it. I love it. Thanks, guys.